I am a 34-year-old man, and my fiancée, Sarah, is 28. Our relationship has spanned nearly 6 years, and we have been engaged for the past year, with our wedding just 2 weeks away. However, a recent experience has left me questioning whether I am making a monumental mistake in our impending union. Last night, Sarah and I managed to carve out a rare moment of relaxation in our busy lives. While she was in the kitchen preparing dinner, I was working on a project in the backyard. The physical labor made me quite thirsty, so I decided to head inside to grab a drink. It was then that I noticed Sarah at the counter, engaged in a conversation on speakerphone. I immediately recognized the voice of my brother-in-law, Marty. The conversation took a turn that sparked confusion within me. Marty was asking Sarah about the whereabouts of Evelyn, his wife, and expressed his frustration over being unable to reach her via text. I overheard Sarah mention that Evelyn had just left our place and would be home in approximately 30 minutes. My curiosity piqued as I moved closer to the kitchen, prompting me to inquire about what they were discussing. Sarah informed me that Marty was trying to locate Evelyn, which seemed innocent enough at first glance. However, as the situation unfolded, I began to pick up on several inconsistencies. First, Sarah had told Marty that Evelyn was at our house, which was entirely untrue, as Evelyn had only been here the previous day to help with wedding decorations. Second, it struck me as odd that Sarah would choose to text Evelyn, given that Marty had already failed to reach her through that medium. Lastly, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that Sarah was perhaps overly confident in assuring Marty that Evelyn would be home soon. This led me to wonder if Sarah had knowledge of Evelyn's actual location, casting a shadow of suspicion over her assurances. My mind became a whirlpool of thoughts, cycling through various interpretations of Sarah's behavior. The idea that she might be withholding the truth from Marty regarding Evelyn's whereabouts seemed possible. Perhaps she was covertly communicating with Evelyn to urge her to return home before Marty arrived. As I pondered these possibilities, I felt a growing urge to confront Sarah. However, uncertainty clouded my mind about how transparent her response would be if my suspicions were indeed valid. A short while later, around 1 a.m., I woke up needing to use the bathroom. In that moment, the temptation to check Sarah's phone became too overwhelming to resist. We both knew each other's pins, so it took little time for me to unlock it. What I discovered confirmed my worst fears. Sarah's sister, Evelyn, had been involved in an affair with a coworker for nearly 6 months. Even more disturbing was the fact that Sarah had been complicit in helping her sister keep this secret. The text messages between them were extensive, detailing the affair, discussing the coworker involved, and even including intimate and embarrassing information that was detrimental to Marty, who remains blissfully unaware. Every word I read felt like a punch to the gut. The shocking revelation left me feeling unsettled and betrayed. Here was my fiancée aiding her sister in wrongdoing without any apparent remorse or concern for the consequences. After taking screenshots of their entire conversation, I quietly returned the phone to its original place and retreated to my home office. I felt an urgent need to share this alarming story on Reddit, a desperate attempt to release the primal scream building inside me. Now I find myself in a harrowing predicament. I cannot proceed with marrying Sarah as planned. The weight of her betrayal is simply too heavy to ignore. My thoughts are consumed by the reality that she has actively participated in causing harm not only to Marty but also to their innocent 2-year-old daughter. On the other hand, the financial implications of calling off the wedding loom large. Both of our families have invested significant amounts of money and resources into the upcoming celebration, which is now scheduled to happen in just 2 weeks. There is little chance we could recover any of those expenses, which adds another layer of stress to an already difficult situation. In addition to the financial turmoil, I cannot shake the feeling of betrayal that hangs over me like a dark cloud. How did I not see this side of Sarah before? What on earth should I do now? The thought of moving forward with our wedding feels entirely impossible in light of this revelation. I am left grappling with a profound sense of disappointment and confusion about how to navigate the turmoil that has suddenly upended my life. Although I am still drawn to her beauty, charm, and the sense of fun she brings into my life, I feel like I must pause and reconsider everything. I once perceived a bright future ahead of us, filled with promise and shared experiences. However, there's a nagging thought in my mind that challenges this notion. Can someone who is genuinely kind assist a cheater? Can they help hide an affair and disrupt the life of a family that includes a young child? To me, that doesn't reflect kindness at all. Although she has never wronged me directly, it's becoming increasingly difficult to view her in the same positive light amid all this turmoil. It feels akin to discovering a dark stain on an otherwise stunning piece of art, it taints the purity of what I once cherished. A few hours later, I decided to share an update on my situation. I arrived at the office around 7 a.m., the quietness of the space amplifying the weight of my thoughts. With no one else present, I took the opportunity to confront the matter head-on. I reached out to my brother, who resides in Australia. Despite the late hour there, he was still awake after putting his kids to bed. Breaking the news to him was an emotional task, especially knowing how much he had invested in flights for his family's trip to the wedding. To his credit, he didn't bring up the financial aspect, focusing instead on offering his support. He pointed out a key truth: my job often requires me to engage with liars and scammers, making it only natural for me to desire a partner I can trust completely. His insight profoundly resonated with me, shedding light on my strong emotional response to Sarah's involvement in the deceitful situation. My brother then proposed a fantastic alternative plan. Although he intended to visit for the wedding, he suggested they take his family to Disney World instead. This idea not only provided a fun alternative but also allowed me to spend time with my brother's kids as their accompanying uncle. Given that my wife and I had already planned our honeymoon in Florida, it was convenient that I could adjust our plans to be closer to them. I also made the decision to offer Sarah's ticket to my sister or another family member, ensuring that the plans would not go to waste. Later, I intended to post another update detailing the stress I was experiencing. I also planned to mention that my friend Marty, whom I was meeting, is a teacher, a profession that comes with its own sets of challenges and demands. When I arrived at Marty's house just after 10 a.m., he had just put his daughter down for a nap, and we settled in for a lengthy, yet difficult discussion in the kitchen. Marty revealed that he had suspected something was wrong for the past couple of months. However, Evelyn, likely with the help of my wife and some of their mutual friends, had been exceptionally skilled at covering her tracks. Unfortunately, I don't have access to the entire 6 months' worth of messages. I only possess a handful of screenshots I managed to forward to myself from Sarah's phone. Regardless, I shared everything I had with Marty and offered my assistance in any manner I could. Given my background as a field analyst in an insurance company specializing in workers' compensation fraud, I felt I had some valuable knowledge and connections that might help. As I sit here at my soon-to-be brother-in-law's kitchen table, working away on my laptop, I feel a whirlwind of thoughts and tasks. I must speak with Sarah this evening to inform her of the wedding's cancellation, and I need to notify my friends and family as soon as possible. It's crucial for me to communicate that I won't be causing harm to Marty before I move forward with any announcements. So far, I've been somewhat successful in rebooking most aspects of the honeymoon, although I encountered a complication regarding the tickets since Sarah was flying under her maiden name. The airline has policies about surname changes, but I was able to cancel the tickets and secure a partial refund. This refund allowed me to rebook for my sister, who will be joining her 2 brothers and nieces for a trip to Florida in a couple of weeks. I've decided to hold off on canceling the venues until after I speak with Sarah. I don't want to inadvertently tip anyone off before Marty has the chance to confront Evelyn about what's been happening. However, I will certainly inform my family and friends this afternoon and ask them to keep everything confidential for the time being. Right now, with so much chaos around me, I'm frantically trying to cancel anything I can. Soon, I'll need to head to the bank to open a new account and figure out my bills and payments. Some people in the comments have suggested separating my finances, which I believe will work out in my favor. The mortgage is under my name since we're not married, and I have a higher income. However, it's worth noting that Sarah contributed approximately $220,000 toward the down payment, while I only managed $60,000. I will likely need to reimburse her for the amount we discussed, as well as cover a portion of the mortgage payments from the last 16 months. While this situation isn't ideal, it could certainly be worse. As an update, it's currently around 8:30 p.m., and I find myself writing this from my buddy Mark's house. Mark is someone I used to work with. We were co-workers in the same field, which is private investigation. For those unfamiliar with my profession, I focus on investigating potential fraudulent claims related to workers' compensation. Earlier today, Marty reached out to me for assistance regarding a personal crisis. He asked for my help in uncovering the identity of the man Evelyn, his partner, has been cheating on him with. The only lead we had was a name, Jake. My investigation didn't start with any elaborate detective work. Instead, I took a straightforward approach by searching through LinkedIn, trying to track down anyone named Jake who might be connected to Evelyn. Unfortunately, my efforts were in vain, as I came up empty-handed, which struck me as odd. Marty had mentioned that Evelyn planned to go out for drinks after work, expected to return home around 9 or 10 p.m. I told him I'd assist but insisted he needed to accompany me for moral support. I reached out to Mark and laid out the entire situation. He was understanding and agreed to join us later that evening. Marty is my brother-in-law, while Mark has been a good friend for years. First, we drove to Marty's parents' house so they could watch over their granddaughter for the evening. I chose to stay in the car while Marty went in to talk to his parents about our plans, not wanting to overhear any potentially sensitive discussions. Our next destination was Evelyn's workplace, which is situated in one of those expansive commercial strip mall complexes filled with a variety of indistinct offices and a large open parking lot. We made several passes around the complex until we finally spotted Evelyn's car. Using a spare set of keys that Marty had, he unlocked the vehicle. I then handed him a voice-activated recorder and a tracking device, instructing him to place the tracker inside the car. After that, we left the area, parking a short distance down the street to await Mark's arrival and also to see when Evelyn would leave her office. Mark arrived about 20 minutes later and got into the car with us. We waited for roughly an hour until we finally saw Evelyn leave her workplace alongside two of her girlfriends and a tall younger man who had sandy blonde hair. It was immediately obvious that Evelyn and the man were holding hands, making our mission a little easier. I quietly snapped a few photos from inside the car and then began following Evelyn as she drove away, tracking her movements in real time. Initially, I speculated she might head to a hotel, but instead, she drove to a nice bar and grill located in a more upscale area. After parking on the street, I made sure to drive past her as she exited her car and made her way inside the restaurant. Finding my own parking spot, I took a moment to go over the plan we had developed. The first step was sending Mark into the bar since no one there knew him. I had assigned him two main tasks. The first was to try to capture any incriminating photographs of Evelyn and Jake, and the second was to serve as my alibi, ensuring that I could blend into the background should anything go awry. Marty and I remained in the car for around 20 minutes, anxiously awaiting an update from Mark. Then I received my first series of text messages from him, accompanied by photos of Evelyn and Jake engaging in romantic gestures right in front of their two female colleagues. Marty's suspicions were confirmed. It became quite clear that Evelyn's friends were in on it, actively helping her conceal the affair from Marty. Marty was visibly upset and angry upon seeing the evidence. He raised concerns that one of the female colleagues involved was married, and both couples were close friends, including toddlers of similar ages. The whole situation was a complete mess, and I could hardly believe it. I asked Marty if the evidence we had so far was sufficient for him, hoping he might reconsider, but he insisted on discovering the full identity of the other man involved. I tried to convince him that we could figure that out later, but he seemed almost desperate to know. So, I decided to comply with his request and messaged Mark to inform him that I was coming inside. As I entered the bar, my eyes quickly scanned the room. I spotted Evelyn laughing and enjoying drinks with her group at one of those tall circular tables near the front window. I paused just inside the entrance, pretending to be surprised by the scene before me. Then I approached Evelyn with a casual greeting. "Evelyn, hi. What are you doing here?" The look of shock on her face was unmistakable, and the atmosphere around her shifted dramatically, becoming tense and loaded with unspoken words. Evelyn wasted no time introducing me as her sister's fiancé, and she excitedly shared that our wedding was just 2 weeks away. The moment those words left her mouth, congratulations began to flow in from everyone around us, creating a warm and festive atmosphere. I felt a surge of gratitude and appreciation for their kind words and support. As the moment settled, I extended my hand to a blonde guy standing nearby and introduced myself fully, hoping for a standard exchange of names. Much to my surprise, he reciprocated, but I was caught off guard when I realized his name wasn't Jake, as I had initially expected. After finishing my introductions with the rest of the group, I turned to Evelyn and mentioned that I had come to meet a coworker. I waved to Mark, who was across the room, then excused myself to join him. Once I reached Mark, I couldn't help but share the curious situation regarding the guy's name. Intrigued, both Mark and I pulled out our phones, ready to dig deeper into this mystery. It didn't take long for us to find out who he really was. He had active profiles on social media and even a couple of legal judgments against him. As more pieces fell into place, we discovered that Jake was merely his middle name. At that moment, a wave of relief washed over me. At least Evelyn wasn't entangled with two different coworkers. As we continued our investigation, it became clear that this guy was 26 years old, married, and had a 1-year-old daughter. The situation was not just complicated, it was becoming worse by the minute. Feeling a strange sense of urgency, I decided to text Marty, sharing the guy's name and testing my luck by asking him to wait a few more minutes. Essentially, I was playing the role of a babysitter at the bar, making sure I was in Evelyn's line of sight as prevention against any unexpected outcomes. A quick glance from the corner of my eye revealed that my presence wasn't particularly welcomed by her or her friends, which made me feel somewhat vindicated. I allowed this standoff to last for about 10 more minutes before instructing Marty to send Evelyn a text letting her know that he would be spending the night at his parents' house with their daughter. Not long after that, I noticed Evelyn taking out her phone, showing something to Jake, and subsequently, everyone in their group seemed to decide that it was time to call it a night. As Evelyn made her way toward me, she bid me good night, even extending an invitation for Sarah and me to come over for dinner that weekend. I smiled at her, agreeing enthusiastically that it sounded like a great idea, then wished her and her co-workers a pleasant evening. After they departed, Mark and I settled our bill and rushed back to where Marty was still waiting. There was some hesitation in our step, we weren't quite sure how Evelyn might react next. Part of me speculated that she might have already booked a hotel room, which would have dramatically complicated everything and limited our options. As it turned out, the night had started off casual, just drinks at the bar, but escalated quickly once Marty decided to spend the night at his parents' place. With Evelyn heading home, we discreetly followed her, parking a short distance down the street. It didn't take long for another car to pull into Marty's driveway, and we watched as Jake got out, walked up to the door, knocked, and was warmly welcomed by Evelyn. They entered the house together, and at this point, it was around 7:30 p.m. I had my own plans for the evening, and while I felt I had done everything I could to help Marty, I knew he was capable of handling the rest on his own. Though I empathized with him, I didn't want to get any more deeply involved in this unfolding drama than I already was. Acting as his wingman while he faced his cheating wife felt like a heavy burden to bear, especially given that I had my own life to manage. Marty seemed to understand my position and assured me he would take it from there. It soon became evident that he had more strength than Evelyn had likely given him credit for. He went to her car to retrieve my equipment, and then we exchanged our goodbyes, which was nearly 2 hours ago. I did receive a text from Marty letting me know he confronted Evelyn and indeed planned to head to his parents' house. Since then, however, my phone hasn't buzzed with updates, leaving me in the dark about the current situation with Evelyn. For now, I've stayed with Mark, feeling that I've fulfilled my role in this complicated mess. If Marty followed my advice wisely, I hoped he might have been recording the events as he entered the house. I would gather all the details later, but for now, I felt that I had done my part. My primary concern at this moment is the impending conversation I must have with Sarah about canceling our wedding. The gravity of this situation weighs heavily on me, as I anticipate that the news will hit her very hard. There's no denying that this is going to be a difficult moment for both of us. Despite the emotional turmoil that lies ahead, I've come to the painful conclusion that I simply cannot go through with marrying her right now. There's a cloud of uncertainty hanging over our future together, and I find myself questioning whether we will continue to be a part of each other's lives moving forward. Nevertheless, I am certain of one thing: a wedding is not in our immediate future. Some may wonder why I chose not to talk to Sarah or confront her first before making this decision. It's essential to understand the context of our situation. Sarah lied to me, boldly and without hesitation, in front of her brother-in-law, someone she has known for a decade and considers a great husband and father. I recognize that some individuals might believe in the possibility of someone lying convincingly to someone they care about, only to later come clean. However, that notion does not align with my values. Until this moment, I had no reason to doubt Sarah's integrity or trustworthiness. However, her betrayal unfolded right before my eyes, forcing me to reevaluate our relationship. Expecting her to suddenly be honest after such a blatant act of deceit simply doesn't make sense to me. Had she chosen to erase the hurtful messages she sent, I might never have discovered the extent of her dishonesty. I would have remained blissfully unaware of the painful truths lurking beneath the surface and would not have realized just how little I actually knew about her. Now, as I prepare to head home to confront Sarah, I'm bracing myself for an incredibly challenging discussion. I know I will need to update everyone on what happens, but I don't anticipate it being a positive exchange. Last night, I finally had that long-anticipated conversation with Sarah, and to say it was chaotic would be an understatement. I'm completely mentally and emotionally exhausted, a state compounded by the fact that I took another sick day and slept in until nearly 10:45 a.m. I appreciate everyone's eagerness for updates, and while writing it all down helps me process my feelings, I feel utterly drained. As you may have noticed, I tend to be somewhat long-winded. it's just a quirk of my profession, as I often find myself immersed in detailed reports. Returning home to discuss the wedding cancellation, I was met with an unexpected scene. Sarah was on the couch, consoling Evelyn, who was visibly upset and crying. For a brief moment, I was tempted to turn around and walk back out the door. This wasn't how I had imagined confronting her. The sight of Evelyn only complicated an already difficult situation. I had formulated a plan for how I wanted the conversation to unfold, but upon entering the room, everything felt off-kilter. Both Sarah and Evelyn looked up when I entered but didn't immediately hurl the accusations I had braced myself for. Instead, I raised an eyebrow, silently seeking clarity in the moment. The awkward silence hung thick in the air. Evelyn wiped her tears but continued to cry softly, while Sarah returned her focus to consoling her friend. I stood in that uncomfortable space for a few seconds, the tension palpable, and I could feel all the uncertainty swirling around us. Later, after leaving Mark's house, I realized how late it had gotten. Sarah was under the impression I was discussing work with Mark, completely unaware it was about her sister's affair. It was time for me to muster the courage to head home and face what lay ahead. With some encouraging words from Mark echoing in my mind, I finally texted Sarah to let her know I was on my way. As I drove, the mix of anticipation and dread coursed through me, knowing that what awaited was not just a simple conversation but a pivotal moment in both our lives. Marty had clearly chosen not to mention my role in uncovering Evelyn's affair, and I decided to play along with this unspoken narrative. I sank into a recliner, a comfortable spot that offered me a chance to observe the unfolding drama more closely. After placing my laptop bag on the floor, I retrieved my phone from my pocket, pretending to scroll through it aimlessly. This gave me an opportunity to break the tension in the room and ask, "What's going on?" Evelyn, still enveloped in tears, was a picture of distress, but Sarah turned her attention to me and began to explain the situation. "Marty is divorcing Evie," she stated matter-of-factly. My curiosity piqued. I couldn't help but ask, "What's the reason?" For a moment, Sarah paused in her comforting of Evelyn, turning to me with a look that was both incredulous and somewhat pained. It reminded me of the expression a young child makes when faced with an unfavorable meal like broccoli or lima beans. Evelyn shot Sarah a glance that conveyed more than words could express, sisterly communication at its finest. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Sarah confessed she cheated on him. This revelation caught me completely off guard. It was far from what I had anticipated hearing. Cynics might argue that since the secret was out, there was no reason to hide it anymore, and while that's true, it doesn't change the fact that Evelyn had a choice. She could have acted like she was unaware or even framed the conversation differently. Marty could have accused Evelyn of infidelity instead of essentially confirming it right in front of me. Evelyn didn't take the news well. She sank into the couch, emitting a sound that was a curious blend of a sigh and a sob, encapsulating the depth of her emotions. Although I felt an urge to press for more details, a part of me stumbled over my words. Sarah likely interpreted my reaction as shock, which was somewhat accurate, though not in the way she thought. I turned to Sarah and asked, "Did you know?" Without uttering a word, she simply nodded, her hand still reassuringly resting on her sister's shoulder. The weight of the moment hung in the air, prompting me to ask the obvious follow-up question, "How long?" Surprising me, the answer came quickly. 6 months, Sarah admitted. The ease with which she confessed left me speechless, and Evelyn appeared equally shocked. She pushed her sister's hand away, indicating that the reality had struck her hard. Even Sarah seemed taken aback by her own admission. I leaned back in the recliner, rubbing my face as the gravity of the situation settled in. It was time to confront the truth, to rip off the proverbial band-aid. "We're done," I stated firmly. "We're not getting married." Both sisters looked at me like deer caught in headlights, their expressions a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "Huh? What?" they exclaimed in unison. I stood up to reiterate my point, emphasizing, "We're not getting married. I can't marry someone who would cover up infidelity for 6 months." Sarah leaped off the couch, her body language screaming disbelief as she opened her arms wide in protest. I raised my hands to communicate my seriousness, stating plainly, "I'm serious. I can't do this. I don't like the fact that she was involved in this, and I can't move forward with the wedding under these circumstances. It would be a mistake." Tears began to flow immediately, and Evelyn's face contorted in a way that resembled a fish desperately seeking air. Sarah erupted into heart-wrenching sobs, accusing me of not loving her sister, trying to appeal to my sense of duty, and mentioning the financial loss, the hassle for our friends, and the sheer embarrassment of it all. Admittedly, these were all factors I had weighed before, but hearing them from Sarah in the throes of her emotion made me reconsider the situation's weight. In what I now recognized as a major misstep, I decided to emphasize the finality of my decision by blurting out, "I've already canceled the honeymoon. It's not happening." The gravity of my words hit me hard, and I knew immediately that I had thrown a bomb into the conversation. The impact was swift and violent. Evelyn, always quick on the uptake, soon connected the dots regarding my earlier appearance at the bar. "You son of a witch," she screamed, launching herself at me with a fierce intensity that I had not anticipated. Though I wasn't a bodybuilder, I wasn't entirely out of shape either. However, when Evelyn came barreling towards me for the fourth time, I found myself caught entirely off guard. I stumbled backward, barely raising my hands in time to shield my face from her furious nails. I clutched my phone, nearly dropping it as I instinctively shoved her away. With all the authority I could muster, I raised my voice and commanded, "Evelyn, get off me." My eyes darted to Sarah, and I added, "Rein in your sister." In that moment of chaos, Evelyn made another frantic lunge toward me, fueled by desperation. However, to my astonishment, Sarah complied with my request. She quickly wrapped her arms around Evelyn, effectively pinning her in place. The sight was a mix of relief and disbelief as I turned my attention back to Evelyn and bellowed, "Get out of here this instant, Oregon. I'm dialing the cops." For emphasis, I waved my phone dramatically in the air, hoping to convey the seriousness of the situation. Sarah, who always played the role of the peacemaker, urged both of us to cool down. She turned to me, trying to reason with me, saying, "Man, she has nowhere to go right now. Plus, Marty snatched her car keys." That explained the emptiness of the driveway. It suddenly made sense. Yet, I was far beyond caring about the particulars of Evelyn's predicament. I had reached a point of sheer frustration, a full-blown 100% level of fed up with her antics. It was clear to me that I needed to make a statement, to ensure she understood the gravity of her actions. In a fit of anger, I stormed into my home office, slamming the door behind me with a loud thud. Once inside, I quickly dialed the police, explaining that I had been assaulted by my fiancé's sister. I painted an almost cinematic picture of the scene, myself cowering in my office, my face bearing the fresh evidence of Evelyn's attack, my vision blurred, and my life hanging precariously by a thread. For added drama, I casually mentioned that I had recorded the entire chaotic brawl on my phone. As I wrapped up my call with the police, Sarah was on the other side of the door, knocking incessantly and pleading with me to come out. "Man, please come out. We need to discuss this. Please, I love you. Let's not go through with this," she implored, adding, "Evelyn wants to apologize." I suspected that last bit was an embellishment, perhaps even pure fiction, but it was abundantly clear that Sarah was on the edge of losing her composure. Ignoring her pleas, I shut down her attempts to coax me out of the office. Just then, the sound of sirens pierced through the charged atmosphere, and I heard the police arrive at our doorstep. Curiosity piqued, I finally decided to emerge from my office. I introduced myself to the officers, pointing an accusatory finger at Evelyn. "She assaulted me," I declared emphatically, offering to show them the video evidence I had recorded to substantiate my claims. The younger officer asked if I wanted to press charges, to which I responded with a forceful yes. He repeated the question, and I reiterated my stance with equal vigor. At this point, both officers exchanged puzzled glances, prompting me to exclaim, "Yes, damn it. I want to press charges. I have video evidence, and this is going to court. Otherwise, I'll be calling your boss by name and requesting he come down here personally to handle this mess." It was evident that they were taken aback by my knowledge of their superior, although it wasn't as if we were best friends. Given the nature of my work, I had encountered local law enforcement enough times to know the ropes. By this stage, my frustration had reached a boiling point. While I understood that the officers might have been questioning the severity of my situation, I firmly believed I had every right to ensure that Evelyn faced consequences for her assault. Thankfully, the situation didn't spiral further out of control, and the two officers handcuffed Evelyn, placing her in the back of their patrol car. She was a sight to behold, screaming and crying like a wild, incoherent person. Sarah wasn't handling it much better either. She stood nearby, repeating, "No, please, no," over and over again, her voice filled with panic. After a moment, the younger officer returned to inquire if everything was okay. I simply mentioned that I was going to bed, but he directed the same question to Sarah. When she didn't respond right away, he raised his voice, asking, "Is everything okay here, ma'am?" His intent was clear, to gauge the situation further. At this point, I had developed a bit of admiration for him, but I remained silent. Sarah finally seemed to grasp that he was talking to her and nodded in response. Nonetheless, he wasn't satisfied and began questioning her again. That's when I decided to intervene, saying, "If you're looking for trouble, maybe you should check over there on the lawn where my doorbell camera isn't recording you." I sensed that I might have overstepped with the officer, pushing his patience to the limit. But I felt cornered and had to assert myself. Just as it seemed I was on the brink of being arrested for my outburst, his partner stepped in and essentially dragged him away, defusing the moment. His partner was an older man, probably in his late 50s, and he clearly wasn't eager to deal with the complications of processing 2 arrests right at the start of his shift. The tension was palpable, especially with one of the individuals involved clearly set to bring more headaches than it was worth. I could sense that the older officer had a certain reluctance. He likely weighed the pros and cons before deciding to talk his partner out of pursuing the matter any further. They ultimately made the choice to leave with Evelyn, and I hoped, perhaps naively, that this meant she would be out of my life for good. Now, as I sat in the guest room, I found myself contemplating whether I should stick around in this unfamiliar place or head back to my parents' home, which was a couple of hours away. The reality of my financial situation loomed over me, reminding me that staying at a hotel could be a strain on my already tight budget. In that moment of indecision, I opted for the guest room in Sarah's house, thinking that it would be a temporary solution. Sarah made several attempts to engage me in conversation, encouraging me to join her in our bed for the night. However, I felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me and decided to postpone any discussions until the following day. When I politely informed her of my need for rest, she seemed to understand and respected my wishes. I sank into a sleep that felt like a deep, restorative slumber, more profound than I had experienced in years. This brings me to the latest update. The next day unfolded in a way that would be hard to believe if I hadn't lived it myself. I woke up around 11 a.m. to find Sarah still at home. To my surprise, she had meticulously cleaned the entire house. The floors gleamed as if they had just been polished, and the bathroom sparkled. I could practically feel the freshness lingering in the air. When she noticed me stirring, she kept her distance, exuding an aura that suggested she had something on her mind but was hesitant to share. The previous night had been traumatic for both of us, and I could sense her turmoil. Did I rashly call off the wedding in the heat of the moment? Was I genuinely serious about my decision? I took a deep breath, realizing that we needed to have an open conversation. As she attempted to sit next to me on the couch, I fought the urge to push her away. Although our wedding plans were off, there was no need for animosity between us. I didn't hate her. I was disappointed, yes, particularly by what I'd uncovered in her text messages with her sister, but I recognized that we were both navigating a difficult situation. I wanted to avoid escalating things and making an already complicated life even more so. I knew I had to put in extra effort to help Sarah understand the gravity of the cancellation. She was taking it extraordinarily hard, her emotional state more fragile than I had anticipated. There were moments I feared she might hyperventilate from the sheer weight of it all. I had been processing my decision for a while, and though the situation was challenging, I found myself handling things a bit better than she was. Eventually, she posed a pivotal question: what about us? I realized that I would likely face criticism from people who thought that any relationship experiencing difficulties should be terminated. Some might argue that calling off the wedding was akin to detonating a bomb within our 6-year relationship. But in that moment, I honestly didn't have a clear answer for Sarah. I simply didn't know how to respond, so I conveyed that to her. I explained that reading those text messages had opened my eyes to a side of her I hadn't fully recognized before. I admitted to her that I was uncertain about her, about us, about the future of our relationship. I expressed my disbelief that she would support Evelyn in criticizing Marty, that she would encourage cheating and betray not only him but their own daughter as well. She kept insisting, I know it was wrong. I pressed for more clarity, but she couldn't provide it. All she could say was that she got swept up in the moment and felt an obligation to support her sister. I made it clear that, in my view, a good sister should keep you grounded and not enable poor choices. She nodded in agreement, acknowledging that Evelyn had always been the stronger personality in their childhood, and she often found herself following her lead. I understood that dynamic to some extent, but it didn't change the reality of what had unfolded. I also have an older sibling, although I lean more towards independence. For the last 18 years, he has lived thousands of miles away, on the opposite side of the globe. Our interactions were mostly limited to a few visits during holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas. In some ways, I might have had an advantage over Sarah, who had a sibling that was, to put it mildly, a poor influence. My older brother is a decent person, and I've always appreciated that about him. However, within a short span of around 48 hours, I found myself grappling with a significant surprise. Sarah confronted me, expressing her frustration about what she deemed unfairness in our situation. I was caught off guard when she elaborated, revealing that she was hurt by my supposed involvement in something called zishing with a girl named Wendy, who she annoyingly referred to as BMI on Instagram. Last year, it seemed, she had been deeply affected by whatever had transpired between me and this Wendy character, and she was upset that I hadn't shown the same level of pain over my current circumstances. I was perplexed because I had no idea who this BMI Wendy was, nor had I ever engaged in anything remotely close to zishing or whatever she was accusing me of. When I asked Sarah if she was joking or if she was perhaps having some sort of breakdown, I realized my reaction wasn't the most tactful. Nonetheless, I genuinely hadn't been involved with anyone online, especially not a girl from Instagram. My bewilderment turned into frustration, leading me to raise my voice in protest. Sarah, on the other hand, was crying and shouting at me, claiming she had seen the messages last year but didn't confront me because I had supposedly stopped whatever I was doing. It knocked me off balance even more to learn that she had been checking my social media accounts from her own computer while I was at work. All I had on my accounts were family members and a few work friends, so I could only imagine how dull it must have been for her to sift through those profiles. In a bid to defend myself, I offered her access to my accounts, hoping she would see for herself that her accusations were unfounded. Instead, she continued to hurl insults at me, calling me a liar and other hurtful names. The situation quickly escalated out of control as she began throwing objects in my direction. Feeling cornered, I warned her that if she didn't stop, I would have to remove her from the house, just as I had done with her sister. She stormed off in anger to the master bedroom, slamming the door behind her. At this point, I was left in a whirlwind of confusion, hardly knowing how to process what had just happened. I retreated to my office, powered up my desktop, and decided to Google BMI Wendy out of sheer curiosity. To my astonishment, I discovered that there was indeed an Instagram account, a Twitter profile, a Reddit presence, and even an OnlyFans page associated with that name. When I clicked on one of the Instagram links, I found a post featuring a rather well-endowed woman whose appearance seemed to defy the limits of not just anatomy but also the boundaries of decency. To add another layer to this revelation, I noticed that this woman was based in Australia. This detail took me back to last Christmas when my brother had visited us from Australia. I had even told him it was okay to use my office computer to play games if he was jet-lagged. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, I couldn't shake the sinking feeling that my brother had likely logged into one of those accounts after his wife and kids were asleep, engaging in explicit conversations and spending money on this woman. This was a shocking realization about someone I had always considered a decent person. I felt a strong urge to call my brother and confront him about what I had discovered, to get confirmation about my suspicions and have a serious discussion about his actions. However, I quickly remembered that it was around 2 or 3 in the morning in Australia, and it was not the right time to reach out to him. As I sat there, restlessly trying to sort through my thoughts, disappointment washed over me. I began to wonder about the implications of this entire situation, grappling with what it meant for me and for Sarah. In a fleeting moment, I tried to draw connections between Sarah's actions and those of my brother, but no matter how hard I thought, it just didn't add up. Perhaps Sarah was simply a more forgiving person than I was, which might explain why she hadn't confronted me when she witnessed whatever she thought I had done. I couldn't shake the thought that if she had come to me sooner, it would have given me the opportunity to explain my side and potentially influence her perception on these matters positively. Or maybe it wouldn't have made a difference at all, I just didn't know. As I continued to pour my thoughts onto the screen, I realized this post was morphing into an essay rather than a simple update. I had spent the better part of the morning trying to articulate my confusing emotions rather than focusing on my work. Although it felt somewhat therapeutic to get all of this off my chest, I was acutely aware that there was still much more to share, at least another 2 or 3 posts worth of details lingering in my mind. I have decided that I will no longer post updates to this subreddit. While I am uncertain whether my posts would even be permitted here moving forward, I plan to quietly update my profile within the next couple of days. This update will include the complete story, detailing my conversations with my brother, my parents, Sarah's parents, and the current situation with Sarah. One thing is clear, many of my immediate family relationships have become incredibly strained for a variety of reasons. Although my parents were supportive initially, that sentiment is beginning to shift as they come to terms with the reality of the financial loss we've experienced. Regarding my relationship with Sarah, it is important to note that our marriage is still off, which was mostly expected from the outset. Sarah's parents have been particularly upset about everything that has transpired, and I can only imagine that they are not pleased with me at this moment. In terms of Evelyn, for those who are wondering, she is no longer in jail because Sarah decided to bail her out. I openly criticized Sarah for her decision, referring to Evelyn as her sister's underling, which seemed to deeply affect her. This prompted her to write me an extensive 20-page letter discussing how her sister has always dominated her during their childhood. I've read this letter twice, and it has left me wishing we had had this conversation at any point over the past 6 years. Perhaps things would have turned out differently, I can't say for certain. I apologize for the delay in providing this update, but the last couple of days have been incredibly eventful, keeping me occupied with various issues. It wasn't until after lunch today that I finally found a moment to pause and gather my thoughts in order to write this. First and foremost, I must admit that I do not have detailed information regarding Marty's divorce. To my understanding, it is still in progress, and there are no official divorce papers filed yet. However, it's clear that he intends to go through with it. I find myself in a position where I cannot advocate for any specific actions he should take, nor can I offer him legal advice or support him against the other man involved or that man's spouse. Marty is an adult, and all I can do as his friend is to be there for him, offering support and guidance only if he asks. It's also important to clarify that this is not some kind of covert promotion for an OnlyFans model. If that were the case, I would have definitely chosen to do it in the first post, which gained a significant amount of traction and garnered over 3 million views. Given the popularity of that post on Reddit, it's not surprising that another user, Bambi, which is a name she has chosen to go by, stumbled across the story and recognized her name in it. It could have just as easily been one of the many individuals who share their photos on Reddit. Regarding Wendy, I have indeed spoken to her, and she was very helpful in confirming certain details for me. As a person, she comes across as quite nice. However, I want to emphasize that there are no romantic intentions on the horizon. Wendy has been happily married for close to 2 decades. While her husband might be okay with her engaging online, she is likely to be more than I can handle as a mere insurance guy. Now, as I move on to the update, I previously left things off with my assumption that my brother had accessed my office computer to chat with Wendy. Unfortunately, at the time, it was too late in his time zone for me to reach out to him. I tend to be the type of person who, when faced with a problem, feels an overwhelming urge to jump in and start working on finding a solution. This trait serves me well in my career, but in situations like this, it can be quite frustrating. Therefore, I decided to take a moment, breathe deeply, and set everything else aside to focus on the tasks that needed my attention. My first priority was to contact everyone from my side who had been invited to the wedding but had yet to be informed about its cancellation. As you may recall, I had already informed my parents about the situation, and they reached out to relatives on that same day. However, only Sarah and I had access to the complete guest list, which meant that I had to take on the responsibility of contacting the rest of our friends myself. Out of respect for those who had agreed to attend our wedding, I opted to call them rather than sending text messages. In hindsight, this may not have been the most efficient choice, as each phone call led to a lengthy explanation about why I was canceling the wedding. While I could have crafted an alternative excuse, I felt it was important for people to understand that my decision was not made lightly or based on something trivial like cold feet. This was a significant choice for me, and it was essential to convey that understanding not only for my own reputation but also to demonstrate respect for those who had agreed to support both Sarah and me as a couple on what was supposed to be a very special day. Late into the evening, after a long, drawn-out process of making calls and sending messages, I finally managed to reach everyone I needed to contact. By the time I got through, it was already morning in Australia, and I could feel the weight of my brother's situation pressing down on me. I had a clear understanding of how I needed to address the issue regarding my brother, but I wanted to make sure that all my plans were in order. So, I decided to take a break. I made myself a simple sandwich in the kitchen, hoping that refueling would help me think more clearly. As I prepared my meal, I realized that Sarah wasn't around. I had no idea when she had left, adding to the uncertainty swirling in my mind. While eating, I found myself deep in thought, contemplating the best steps to take concerning my brother, who for simplicity's sake, I'll refer to as Carl from now on. Carl and I have always maintained a close bond, which is somewhat remarkable given our 13-year age gap. He took on a quasi-parental role in my life, especially as I began forming lasting memories. By the time I was becoming more aware of the world around me, he was well on his way to adulthood. He always made the effort to spend quality time with me when other teenagers might have chosen to avoid such responsibilities. To me, he always appeared mature and wise, and I held him in high regard growing up. However, my feelings about Carl shifted dramatically when I learned that he had been engaging in inappropriate online conversations with a woman who was not his wife, all while under my roof. This revelation was something I was still grappling with, struggling to come to terms with the implications of his actions. I needed to make a decision on how best to handle the situation. It seemed evident that I needed to talk to him about it, but with my own relationship with Sarah already in turmoil, I was uncertain whether I even cared enough to push Carl to confess just so I could clear my own name. Despite my conflicted feelings, I sensed a duty to voice my frustrations and at the very least urge him to put an end to these behaviors. Yet, a question lingered in my mind. I hadn't decided whether or not I would report him to my sister-in-law, who I'll refer to as Karen. The decision hinged on the nature of our conversation and whether I could trust Carl's explanations. After finishing my sandwich, I logged into Facebook with the intent of initiating a video call with Carl. Given that he primarily works from home in the IT sector, he was usually available during the day, and today was no exception. The call rang only once or twice before he answered. We exchanged greetings and made small talk, but I knew I had to cut to the heart of the matter. I asked Carl directly if he had been using my computer to engage in explicit online chats with women during his visit. His reaction was immediate. I saw his expression shift as he leaned out of the camera frame, obviously closing his office door for privacy. "Yeah, I did." "Why?" he replied, his tone blunt. I muttered under my breath in frustration and explained how Sarah had mistakenly thought his flirting had originated from me since he had used my computer. I made it clear that I was not pleased at all about being wrongly implicated in his actions, and I asked him point-blank whether Karen was aware of what he had been doing. Carl hesitated, stumbling over his words. He seemed embarrassed as he admitted that Karen did not know about his actions and that he preferred to keep it that way. He began to confide in me about the difficulties within their relationship, particularly in the bedroom, which had worsened since the birth of their youngest child 4 years prior. Carl had always been a private person, especially concerning intimate matters, but this time, he spoke openly. He expressed his frustration over a pattern of constant rejection, explaining how Karen was always too tired for intimacy, despite his attempts to help around the house. His feelings of inadequacy led to issues such as performance anxiety during the rare occasions when Karen was interested. The cycle was vicious, driving him to escape to his office at night under the guise of working late. He even used finger quotes to emphasize the pretense. What had initially been a place for him to focus on legitimate work quickly spiraled into an addiction to adult sites, taking advantage of the privacy of his home office. I asked if he was still involved in that behavior, and he vehemently denied it. I wanted to believe him. He appeared sincere, yet a nagging feeling lingered in the back of my mind that something was off. Perhaps it was the culmination of the deceit I had faced recently that led me to question my own brother, a man who had consistently proven himself to be reliable and upright throughout our lives together. The very thought of doubting him felt uncomfortable and unsettling, amplifying the complexity of the situation I found myself in. On one hand, if I wanted to clear my own name, I needed to convince my brother to confess to Sarah, admitting that he was the one behind all the recent chaos. However, I couldn't shake the anxiety that if he did come clean, there was no guarantee that Sarah wouldn't, out of spite or resentment, inform Karen about his actions. Personally, I believe that revealing the truth to Karen was the right thing to do. She deserved to know. Yet, I grappled with the uncomfortable realization that doing so might potentially destroy my brother's marriage, especially since he insisted he had stopped his reckless behavior. This moral dilemma weighed heavily on me, and I didn't have an immediate solution. I did, however, strongly encourage him to be honest with his wife about his transgressions. I stressed the importance of seeking marriage counseling, a measure I thought could help navigate their issues and promote healing. Carl mentioned they had been attending counseling sessions for the past 6 months. While he felt those sessions had been beneficial, he revealed that the real breakthrough came when he received a prescription for generic Viagra. His admission took me by surprise. I almost spat my drink on my computer screen as he spoke. He explained that this had significantly eased his performance anxiety, allowing them to establish a more fulfilling intimate life together. They were now managing to carve out those special moments a few times a week, which had reinvigorated their connection. After their kids went to bed, they looked forward to spending quality time together, a notion that filled Carl with relief. His message was clear: they were finally on a beneficial path, and he desperately wanted to avoid anything that could sabotage their progress. I genuinely disliked being in this predicament, not only for Carl and Karen's sake but also for my two nieces. If what Carl said was true, I risked disrupting a relationship that was slowly mending itself. The uncertainty of the outcome loomed over me. As much as it might upset others, I believed that for the moment, the wisest decision was to wait and observe how things unfolded. After all, I had a chance to meet Carl in person in a couple of weeks. I planned to sit down with him, share a few drinks, and dig into this situation more thoroughly. It seemed like the most sensible course of action. That night, I hit the bed early, consciously trying to process everything. I didn't see Sarah until the following morning. When she walked in, she looked worn out, her features suggesting she hadn't slept well. Habitually, I asked her about her whereabouts, considering we had been together for nearly 6 years. She explained how she had gone to the courthouse for Evelyn's arraignment to post bail. The courts closed early on weekends, which was why she had left shortly after I had retreated to my office. Following that, she drove Evelyn to her parents' house and spent the night there. She made a point of expressing how challenging it had been to explain to her parents that I had called off the wedding. Curiosity got the better of me, and I asked if her parents knew the reasons behind my decision. In a snap, she replied, "Of course they do." It took considerable restraint to keep my composure. Frustration was mounting within me. In an impulsive moment, I retorted, questioning whether she was planning to move back in with her parents now that both girls would be there. I recognized my response was childish and somewhat petty, but the fact that she had bailed Evelyn out of jail only fueled my irritation. She shot back with, "You don't need to be rude about this," to which I fired back, "And you don't need to be Evelyn's obedient follower." Her reaction was immediate. I could see her visibly flinch, the word striking a nerve. Tears welled in her eyes, and it was a moment that brought a heavy silence between us. We stood there, a significant distance apart in our living room, neither of us willing to break the stillness for a couple of minutes until Sarah finally spoke again. She informed me that our parents were coming over at 3. I facepalmed at that news. There was a part of me that wanted to confront her for not consulting me about the visit, but I quickly realized that responding that way was driven by ego. I needed to sit down with our parents anyway, to sort out the details regarding the wedding and any remaining deposits. More importantly, I had to explain to everyone in person why the wedding plan had fallen through. Reluctantly, I agreed to go through with it, knowing that it was necessary to clear the air and put an end to this tumultuous chapter. I made an effort to keep myself busy throughout the day, but Sundays often present a unique challenge when it comes to finding engaging activities. With the impending reality of a tough conversation looming over me, I found it hard to immerse myself in anything truly enjoyable. Time seemed to drag on, each passing moment serving as a reminder of what was to come. Finally, at 3 p.m., our parents arrived, and we all gathered around the large kitchen table. This table was a recent addition to our home, something Sarah had purchased shortly after we moved in. It was a second-hand piece she discovered on Facebook Marketplace, and she had fallen in love with it instantly. Made of solid oak and featuring a stunning finish, it could comfortably seat 8 people, which certainly added to its appeal. However, she had a vision that was now overshadowed by the tension in the air. She had hoped to host grand dinner parties with our families, though today's gathering was far from the joyful occasion she had envisioned. The next 3 hours were filled with a palpable sense of discomfort. None of us seemed particularly happy, and rightly so, given the circumstances. The most substantial support I received during this time came from my parents, but even their encouragement was laced with caution. Their comments felt like an acknowledgement of the situation, essentially stating, "Well, it's his decision to make," which conveyed their concern while still standing by my side. They understood how challenging this was for me, but they didn't want to become involved in the stigma surrounding a cancelled wedding. I appreciated their concern and was grateful they weren't burdened by the fallout. I was more than willing to take full responsibility for what had transpired. As we began discussing the financial aspects of the wedding, we reached a tentative agreement to try and recoup any funds we could. We decided to divide the recouped expenses based on who had contributed what. Some costs, like the honeymoon, were fully covered by me, while others, such as the flowers, were paid for entirely by Sarah's parents. The plan was to share any remaining losses collectively. However, the conversation took a sharp turn when we addressed the topic of the house. Sarah was visibly opposed to my suggestion of reimbursing either her or her parents for the down payment, signaling her intent to remain in the house. The very notion of settling the equity caught her off guard, as if it implied I expected her to leave. Her strong reaction was understandable. It was clear I had broached a sensitive subject without first discussing our relationship status. I regretted not addressing our feelings towards one another before jumping into a financial negotiation. My comments inadvertently exposed my thoughts about our relationship to everyone present. While our parents might have expected or at least understood the implications, Sarah was understandably upset. She firmly stated her position, declaring that there was no way she was leaving her house and that we were not going to break up. Her resolute stance encapsulated the tension that had built up over the course of the day. When our parents finally left, Sarah and I tried to continue the conversation, but we found ourselves going around in circles, unable to arrive at any sort of resolution. I was mentally drained and just sought to quiet the whirlwind of thoughts racing through my mind. Surprisingly, we ended up sitting on the couch in silence, watching a movie as a distraction until it was time to call it a night. Our parting words were vague, centered around a tentative "we'll discuss it further tomorrow," as we retreated to our respective rooms. The following morning, I discovered a lengthy handwritten letter from Sarah slipped under my door. I took a glance at the first few pages but decided to set it aside for later, needing to focus on my work responsibilities. When I left for the office, Sarah was still in bed, which suggested she had spent a significant amount of time the previous night pouring her thoughts onto paper. While at the office, I took steps to reschedule some of my meetings and initiated contact with various venues and vendors on my list, while Sarah and her parents were handling the other aspects. The responses I received varied widely. The catering team, for instance, insisted that I pay the majority of their fees, claiming they had already ordered a substantial amount of food. I argued with them, incredulous that they expected me to eat week-old steak, but my protests fell on deaf ears. I even attempted to speak directly with the catering business owner to explain my situation, but that only seemed to bolster her determination to extract as much money from me as she could. On a more positive note, the DJ I had hired for the event turned out to be remarkably understanding. He promptly refunded nearly all of the money I had paid him, although the amount wasn't particularly significant in the grand scheme of things. Nonetheless, it was a relief to encounter someone willing to recognize the unusual circumstances. The day unfolded with a steady rhythm, characterized by a series of phone calls and various work tasks that filled my hours. In between these responsibilities, I found myself revisiting the letter from Sarah, a lengthy document spanning around 20 pages that encapsulated her thoughts and feelings. To provide a comprehensive overview, her letter primarily focused on her experiences of bullying from her sister, Evelyn. Over the years, Sarah has developed a coping mechanism that involved conforming to Evelyn's expectations and desires. This pattern of behavior has infiltrated her life deeply, making her hesitant to disrupt any sense of harmony or raise issues, even when it meant suppressing her own opinions. As I reflected on this dynamic, I began to scrutinize the nature of my relationship with Sarah. It became apparent that she had taken on the role of an overly accommodating partner. She rarely voiced disagreements, consistently prioritized my plans over hers, and seldom opposed anything I suggested. It was as if she had adopted a persona dedicated to being helpful, resembling what many would call a yes woman. In our 6 years together, we had never even faced a minor disagreement, let alone a significant argument, until now. At first glance, this lack of conflict might seem ideal, but I soon realized that it was masking deeper issues. I couldn't shake the growing awareness that Sarah's accommodating nature stemmed from profound insecurities and a pervasive desire to please others, a classic case of people-pleasing. Viewing our relationship through this lens clarified many things for me. Despite the time we had spent together, I came to understand that I didn't truly know her. Instead, it felt like she had built a facade around herself, one that reflected what she believed I and others wanted to see. Her portrayal of the perfect girlfriend was compelling, yet it obscured her true self. The messages I received from her seemed like another layer of this mirroring, reflecting Evelyn's flaws in addition to her own. This realization may sound strange, but it painted our relationship in a new light. While it was clear that Sarah loved me for my authenticity, it became apparent that my affection for her had been tied to the image she projected, one that often mirrored my own identity. This notion, albeit abstract, resonated deeply with me. Over the past few days, I had learned more about Sarah's inner world than I had in our entire relationship. Her letter finally provided me with a meaningful insight into her childhood and the patterns that shaped her behavior. That night, we continued to explore these themes together, discussing her upbringing and the fears that had manifested as an adult. It was evident that she was trapped in a cycle of anxiety, stifled by a childlike fear of disappointing those around her, be it facing her sister's wrath, seeking approval from her parents, or worrying about losing the love of those she cared for. Recognizing that this was an unhealthy approach to relationships solidified my belief that canceling the wedding was indeed the right choice. The conversation we had that night left me feeling a significant weight lifted off my shoulders, allowing me to sleep with a sense of peace that had eluded me for several days. Now, I find myself at a pivotal moment where a brief update feels necessary. I intend not to delay sharing more insights, as it would only lead to feeling overwhelmed by the circumstances. For those following the situation, my relationship with my brother has reached a resolution, details of which I will share tomorrow. However, my situation with Sarah remains a bit uncertain, although we have crafted a tentative plan for moving forward. There is much to unpack, and while writing about the chaos of my life has become increasingly daunting, I realize the wedding date has passed. I am currently on vacation with my siblings and my brother's family, which has begun to create a sense of moving past the turmoil. To address the concerns many have voiced, my brother and his wife are faring well, and I look forward to providing further updates soon. The recent events have certainly been overwhelming, but I am determined to keep this narrative going, even amidst the lengthy explanations and complex emotions at play. In my last post, I discussed my encouragement for my brother to come clean to his wife, Karen, about his online interactions with a woman from Australia, referred to as BMI Wendy. It's important to note that Wendy is not just another online persona, she is genuinely a nice person. In my previous update, I mentioned that I had received confirmation from her that supports my brother's side of the story. She indicated that the timelines of their interactions matched, and intriguingly, my brother's account on the platform no longer exists. While it's possible that Wendy could be lying to protect a client, I genuinely believe she seemed sincere in her communications. My brother took a significant step by revealing what had happened to Karen during one of their marriage counseling sessions. According to him, she reacted relatively well and has chosen to view the incident as water under the bridge. Just last week, I had a private conversation with Karen, inquiring if she was genuinely okay with everything that had transpired. She reassured me, paraphrasing a bit, saying that they are not as prudish as one might assume, both she and my brother watch adult films together, and that experience shapes how she perceives these online interactions. She emphasized that she didn't see it as him planning to have an affair. I pressed her on how she would feel if he had decided to visit a legal sex worker, which is permissible in their area. She admitted she wouldn't be comfortable with that scenario, but since he did not take that step, it seemed to create a clear boundary for them. This perspective diverges significantly from my own views and from some vocal opinions shared on Reddit. However, based on the sounds emanating from their hotel room last night, it appears their relationship is thriving again, and their previously strained situation seems to have improved considerably. The two of them are making the most of their time away together. They switched hotel rooms with my sister, who is taking care of their child, Sarah. Meanwhile, the kids are with my sister, and they have even arranged for 2 babysitters who are keen to look after the children while they enjoy some much-deserved private time. It's safe to assume what they might be up to, but I'll refrain from providing details on that front. Looking back, I feel confident in my decision to allow my brother the space he needed to address this situation himself, even in the face of pressure from others to intervene. I firmly believe that comparing my brother's situation with the one involving Evelyn is like comparing night and day. Engaging in online intimacy with someone who is a professional sex worker does not carry the same weight as maintaining a full-blown affair. My reaction to my brother's situation starkly contrasts with how Sarah managed her affair with Marty. Unlike my brother, Sarah chose to keep her infidelity a secret from Marty and engaged in disparaging discussions about him, along with making various other unkind remarks, which I won't detail here for personal reasons. To sum up, I stand by my choices, and while others may disagree, that is their prerogative. Now, shifting gears to the wedding itself, there isn't an abundance to report. Both Sarah and I, along with our families, faced considerable losses, although we had anticipated this outcome. I took the initiative to negotiate with the caterer, who insisted that all the food had already been ordered. Ultimately, she agreed to either issue a larger refund or provide the food itself. We opted for the latter, which felt fair to us. Consequently, we now have a substantial supply of frozen steak, chicken, and fish that was delivered to my parents' house, and they are distributing it among interested family members. Additionally, wedding gifts from distant relatives have started to arrive at my house, and we plan to return those when we're able. The The wedding date came and went, and for the sake of our own mental well-being, Sarah and I decided to spend that day apart. Regarding the ongoing situation with Marty and Evelyn, I don't foresee a quick resolution. Marty has set his sights on divorcing Evelyn, but she is complicating matters by pleading with him to think it over. As the new school year begins, Marty will return to his teaching duties and will not be able to take care of their daughter daily, which is understandably weighing heavily on him. He finds some comfort in spending time with his parents and daughter, but the stress is palpable. Surprisingly, despite the tense circumstances, Marty has not caused any issues for Evelyn at work, even though he is aware that their extramarital activities took place during work trips. In an unexpected move, he also informed Jake's wife about the affair, a choice I strongly disagree with. When I brought this up with him, he simply said he's not in any rush to resolve things. He currently holds a collection of text messages, photos from their time at the pub, and a video capturing the moment he stepped into the house, all of which afford him the leverage to expose Jake at any moment he deems appropriate. This situation raises questions about Marty's motives. Perhaps he takes some satisfaction in the power he wields over Jake, deliberately making him uneasy. Alternatively, he might see this as a way to help Evelyn come to terms with her role as the other woman in a married man's life. The exact nature of Marty's transformation remains somewhat ambiguous, but it is clear that he has undergone a significant change, a shift that I cannot entirely fault him for. My understanding of Evelyn is primarily derived from Sarah, as I lack direct insight into her life. From what I gather, her routine has become quite mundane, primarily revolving around work and then immediately retreating to her parents' home, reminiscent of a teenager constrained by a curfew. It is evident that her parents are far from pleased with either of their daughters at this point. In an interesting turn of events, the very public collapse of my wedding seems to pale in comparison to the ongoing turmoil surrounding Evelyn's impending divorce. It appears that their attention has shifted away from Sarah, especially after seeing Marty take tangible steps to divorce Evelyn and secure visitation rights with their granddaughter. Their frustration towards Evelyn has seemingly intensified, not only because of the situation at hand but also due to the impending reduction in their time with their grandchild. Now, addressing the situation between Sarah and me, I do not believe this update will bring joy to anyone involved. Whether those who urged me to end things or those who counseled me to approach her with compassion regarding her apparent mental health challenges, the truth is that apart from the deception associated with the affair, what has troubled me the most is her manner of communicating with her sister through those text messages. Some might grasp my perspective more fully if I were to share the messages, but I refuse to engage in such a debate and will not divulge their contents. To put it plainly, those messages prompted me to reevaluate Sarah's character. That leads me to my current state of consideration. I am still assessing my feelings and understanding of her. To clarify, Sarah and I are no longer together in the same way we once were as an engaged couple, but we have not entirely closed the door on our relationship either. I have come to discern a more profound understanding of Sarah's personality. I can now differentiate between her true self and the facade she adopted to appease those around her, including her sister. This behavior, characterized as people-pleasing, resonates more with me now, particularly after hearing various examples from her family. It is also reassuring to note that she is actively seeking help to address these issues, a step I commend her for, despite finding her behavior profoundly unsettling. Her response to the incident on that fateful night when I discovered her and Evelyn on the couch was noteworthy. She did not attempt to lie, minimize, or evade responsibility, even though she was unaware that I had already seen her text messages with Evelyn. She chose to be honest with me, even when it could have cast her in an unfavorable light, and that honesty holds considerable weight in my perspective. This realization leads me to contemplate the possibility of changing the chapter of our relationship rather than completely closing it. It's essential to note that this isn't a victory for those who advocate for simply forgiving her and attributing all blame to her sister. I have not forgiven her, and the dynamics of our situation have certainly evolved. Currently, Sarah has moved back to her old room at her parents' house, mirroring Evelyn's situation, but she plans to leave in a couple of weeks. She believes that her current living situation is harmful to her mental well-being and her journey towards seeking help. At this point, we are definitely not together in any meaningful sense. Initially, Sarah hesitated to agree with this decision, and while I can empathize with her viewpoint, I think that if she indeed struggles with emotional issues as it appears, then delaying her pursuit of necessary help may be counterproductive. Simply forgiving her would imply sweeping critical matters under the rug, which could ultimately harm our relationship in the long run. I wish she had opened up to me sooner, allowing me the opportunity to address underlying issues as a supportive partner. However, given our circumstances, the most prudent approach I can take now is one of patience. My current state regarding Sarah can be summarized as a wait-and-see approach. There's a chance that one or both of us might ultimately decide to call it quits and completely sever ties. It could very well be me who chooses to move on, but presently, I have no inclination to complicate my life further by getting involved with another woman at this moment. Given the complexity of the situation at hand, I believe that it will take several months before we arrive at a clear and definitive resolution regarding our relationship. I am entirely comfortable with this timeline, as not every issue needs to be addressed at a frantic pace fueled by intense emotions. In fact, I think it's often better to take our time in order to ensure a thoughtful approach. If I ever come to the conclusion that Sarah's challenges are simply too great to overcome or that rebuilding the trust between us is an insurmountable task, I will not hesitate to make the difficult decision to walk away. I have no interest in dragging out a relationship that feels hopeless or destined for failure. That said, I do not believe we are at such a dire point. I fully recognize that while this journey will undoubtedly be challenging, it is not without its possibilities for growth and resolution. I am open to giving this time and space to unfold naturally. I've made the decision to seek out my own counselor during this period to help me process everything that has transpired over the past few weeks. I want to gain a clearer understanding of not only my own feelings but also how Sarah and I have interacted. It's important to acknowledge that while I may have felt deceived by her actions, I also played a role in that dynamic. After all, who wouldn't appreciate a partner who consistently aligns her plans with mine, never openly disagrees, and prioritizes my happiness over her own? The difficulty lies for both of us in differentiating between Sarah's authentic love for me and her profound need to please others, which seems to stem from a deep-seated fear of rejection and anxiety. Ultimately, once we begin to unravel these complex questions about our feelings and motivations, we will be able to discern the future of our relationship. I understand that this update may not align with everyone's expectations, but it represents my current state of mind and perspective on the situation. For those interested, feel free to check back in a few months to see how everything unfolds.